definitely died. I had an experience where I was dead and alive again. Changed everything.
These are 10 athletes who nearly died and lived to tell how Jesus met them in the moment between breaths. 1. Imani McGee-Stafford. When suicide failed and purpose awakened, she was a rising star. Imani McGee-Stafford, standing 6 feet 7 inches, was unstoppable on the court. But off the court, she was crumbling. Behind the bright lights of the WNBA was a young woman haunted by trauma. The pain was too deep, the silence too loud. So one night, she tried to end it all. A suicide attempt, meant to be final, failed. And in that moment of confusion and survival, something happened. Imani didn't just survive. She awakened. In the hospital, she said it felt like a veil lifted. And in the stillness of that near-death moment, she met peace like she'd never known. Not from fame, not from applause, but from Jesus. She didn't just walk out alive, she walked out reborn. Today, Imani speaks boldly about her faith, her healing, and her purpose, all rooted in the God who met her in the dark. But the next story isn't about suicide. It's about a teenager, bleeding on the street, praying to live long enough to forgive his attacker. 2. AC Green, the Iron Man who refused to die. Before he was known as the NBA's Iron Man, AC Green was just a teenager in South Central Los Angeles, trying to stay alive. One day, a street argument spiraled out of control. A fight broke out. A weapon was drawn. A C was stabbed in the stomach. He collapsed, blood pouring. The world around him slowed. "I remember thinking," he said, "this can't be how it ends." Everything was dark. His body was limp. And then he said he felt a presence cover him, like a shield. He survived. Doctors couldn't explain why the wound hadn't done more damage. But AC never forgot that moment. It was the turning point.
AC slam dunk, his second of that nature in the game. That's authoritative.
Well, the Lakers are doing something. He went on to set the NBA's record for most consecutive games played, without missing one. A streak built not just on discipline, but divine purpose. And while AC stood tall in stadiums, our next story unfolds behind the scenes. A man millions know on TV, who almost lost everything behind closed doors. 3. James Brown, the broadcaster who faced death and found his foundation. James Brown, the trusted face of NFL today, had spent decades bringing energy and insight to millions of fans every Sunday. But what viewers didn't see was the war going on inside his body. Multiple health scares, a dangerous surgery. At one point, doctors weren't sure he'd make it. In one moment, surrounded by machines, monitors, and quiet panic, he closed his eyes and surrendered. He said later, "All the success, the fame, the TV deals, none of it could save me, but Jesus could." In that sacred moment between life and death, James felt peace. He didn't beg, he believed. And when he woke up, he knew one thing: God had spared him for a reason. Today, James Brown is more than a sportscaster. He's a man of God. He uses every interview, every platform, to point back to the one who brought him back from the edge. But our next athlete's story doesn't begin in a hospital. It begins on a football field, with a sprint toward tragedy and a cry no father should ever have to make. 4. Marquise Goodwin, the sprinter who watched death arrive too soon. Marquise Goodwin was built for speed, an Olympic sprinter, an NFL wide receiver. But on the day his son was born, time stood still. It was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became a funeral. His baby died just hours after delivery. And Marquise, he was broken. That night he said, "I didn't want to run. I didn't want to breathe. Then came the voices, the silence, the darkness, and somewhere in that space, between pain and numbness, he cried out to God. Not for answers, just for help. He didn't hear thunder, no visions, but he says he felt arms around him, though no one was there. I knew it was Jesus, he later said. That moment changed my whole soul. Marquise ran again, not just for medals, but for meaning. He now honors his faith openly, raising his family with gratitude and sharing the God who gave him comfort when nothing else could. And while Marquise lost a child, the next story is about a man who lost his breath, but found his voice in a vision that doctors couldn't explain. 5. Reggie White, the minister who saw what came next. Reggie White was more than an NFL legend. They called him the Minister of Defense, a Hall of Famer, a preacher, a warrior. But toward the end of his life, Reggie battled a rare lung disease. Each breath came harder, and then one night, he stopped breathing altogether. For a full minute, his body didn't respond. Medical staff panicked, his wife cried out, and Reggie, he said he went somewhere. He described a vision of heaven, not as clouds and harps, but as a presence so holy it brought him to his knees. He heard worship, he saw light, and then he was pulled back. When he woke, he whispered to his wife, "God isn't done with me." Though Reggie passed away shortly after, those who knew him say he was glowing in those final weeks, as if he had already seen what was coming and had made peace with it. And if Reggie saw heaven, the next man saw fire, a ring, a referencia, a knockout, then a voice that changed everything. 6. George Foreman, the boxer who met God in the locker room. George Foreman was a heavyweight champion, feared, ferocious, untouchable, until one night in 1977, after a brutal fight in Puerto Rico, everything stopped. He was drenched in sweat, dizzy, and then his heart slowed to nothing. In that locker room, George Foreman died. But what he described next stunned the world. He says he left his body, he floated, watched people scramble, and then descended into a place of darkness. "I was surrounded by death," he later said. "I couldn't breathe. I felt hopeless. I screamed, 'God, I don't care if this is the end. Just save me.' And just like that, he returned, back in his body, gasping for air, alive, but not the same. That night, the fighter became a follower. George Foreman gave his life to Jesus right there in the locker room. He left boxing, became a preacher. Years later, he returned to the ring. But this time, he fought with peace. But it was death that showed him who the real king was. And while George was revived in a locker room, the next athlete woke up paralyzed, but with more spiritual fire than ever before. 7. Inky Johnson, the day his body failed, but his faith came alive. Inky Johnson was destined for the NFL, a rising star at the University of Tennessee. Scouts lined the stands. The dream was within reach. Until one play changed everything. A routine tackle, but the impact, catastrophic. His right arm went limp, then number, then gone. Inky Johnson never played again. He suffered permanent nerve damage. Doctors said he could have died from internal bleeding had he not been rushed to surgery. And as he lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by silence and questions, he met God in a way he never had before. He didn't ask, "Why me?" He asked, "What now?" And the answer was clear. Preach, inspire, point to me. Today, Inky Johnson is one of the most sought-after Christian speakers in the world. He never regained use of his arm, but he says he gained something greater, faith that can't be shaken. And while Inky stood in front of crowds, another athlete collapsed behind closed doors, a legend, lost in addiction, until grace dragged him out of the grave. 8. Darryl Strawberry, from overdose to ordained. Darryl Strawberry was one of the biggest names in baseball. A 4-time World Series champion. The kind of player you'd bet your career on. But behind the glory, there was pain, addiction, and eventually, a brush with death. Multiple overdoses, seizures, moments where his heart nearly stopped. "I should have died," he said, more than once. One night, after collapsing from a drug binge, he says he saw a vision. Jesus standing over him, silent but present. When he woke up, something inside had broken. But not in a bad way. His pride, his ego, his fear. He turned to Christ, not in a rehab center, not in a stadium, but on the floor of a motel, half dead, fully surrendered. Today, Darryl Strawberry is a preacher, a pastor, a walking miracle. "God saved me from myself," he says, "and now I live for him." And while Darryl escaped death in a haze, our next story is more quiet, more internal, but no less divine. 9. Muhammad Ali, the silence that brought the voice of God. Muhammad Ali called himself the greatest, a champion in the ring, a legend in history. But near the end of his life, his body failed. Parkinson's disease had taken his speech, his strength, and for a while, his hope. But Ali didn't just lay in silence. He listened. In those quiet hours, when cameras were gone and muscles no longer obeyed, he said he began to hear God. He reflected deeply on life, on purpose, on truth, and slowly his pride faded. His heart softened. Those close to him say he became deeply spiritual, spending hours in prayer and private devotion. Ali spoke of visions, dreams, moments where he believed God was preparing him for what came next. He may not have shouted it from stages, but in his final days, Muhammad Ali was a man humbled before his Creator. "Service to others is the rent you pay for your room in heaven," he once said. And now, only one story remains. A man whose fame brought him to every dark place imaginable, until one overdose nearly took him, and Jesus finally reached him. 10. Brian Head, Welch, the rock star who died inside and came alive in Christ. Brian Head. Welch wasn't an athlete in the traditional sense, but his life moved at the speed of destruction. As the lead guitarist for the metal band Korn, his days were filled with sold-out arenas and nights with cocaine, pills, and darkness. He was rich, famous, worshipped, but inside, he was dying. One night, after days without sleep and a cocktail of drugs in his system, he collapsed. His heart pounded, his vision blurred. He thought it was the end. "I felt demons clawing at me," he later said. "I thought I was dying and going where I deserved." In that moment of terror, he screamed out one name, Jesus, and instantly, the darkness broke. He felt peace. He felt light. He knew he'd been saved, physically and spiritually. Brian walked away from the band, from the fame, and into a church with nothing but tears and repentance. Today, he's back with Korn, but with Christ at the center. He travels the world, not just playing music, but preaching salvation. "I was dead inside," he said. "Now I'm alive in Him." They were strong, famous, unstoppable, but only when death came close did they discover what life really is. If God meets athletes in hotel rooms, hospitals, locker rooms, what might He be trying to say to you?